Welcome, everyone. I'd like to make several announcements. We have a wonderful program for you today. Please silent or put your phone on vibrate. And if you need to take a call, please step outside and away from the door because Carrie's inside. Trying something new, the program. And from here, the rest of the year, whoever is the host, if they give me all the information I need, you'll have a program each month. To everything, there is a season, a time for every purpose. May I introduce to you one of our favorite people in our guild and one of the hardest workers, Andrew Loffer.
Yeah.
Because his presentation today is something I ask if he would please do, because we are on a time of certain things. And please welcome Andy Loffer. Andy?
Yeah. All right, Andy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for letting me tell you a story today. I appreciate being here. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? Isn't it extraordinary out there today? Even though it's extraordinary for us today, there are problems in the world. There's hurricanes happening, there's floods happening, there's wars happening. The story I'm going to talk about kind of addresses, it doesn't really address, but there's a forest fire involved in the story, another catastrophe, right? But before I wanted to tell my story, I want to read a poem, and it's what we call a contrapuntal poem. In fact, that's the title, and it's by Sandra Tannhauser. Sandra is on Zoom. She is a member of the Coast to Coast Poets that I'm a member of as well. She's an excellent poet, and she wrote this poem that really stuck in my mind, especially with relation to this story that I'm going to tell. And so it's called contrapuntal. And so what that means is counterpoint, basically. Okay, but as far as poetry goes, it's kind of a counter emotion. It's going to be a bit heavy, but then the story I'm going to tell you will help you deal with that heaviness, I think. So Contrapuntal by Sandra Tannhauser. It is spring. The Japanese maple erupts in blood-red leaves. The bombs in Rafah leave an acrid smell, sulfur, plastic, rotting flesh. Rhododendron flowers, the purple of twilight, poppies, golden sun. Around you, ashes and rubble, sewage spilling down the street. The sweet songs of birds in the morning, the winged swirls of antlions in the evening air. Children no longer cry or laugh, no food or water, heat or light. Sunlight spilling through the window, the deep blue after rain. Many have lost their limbs before they learn to walk. Bulbs are emerging from the earth, about to flower for early butterflies. Millions displaced in Ukraine, in the Congo, rapes, abductions. A time to awaken after the winter dark, a time for renewal. Orphaned with nowhere to go, 5 years old, thoughts of suicide. Like I said, it's a heavy poem, but the title of my story is called Hummingbird. Legend has it that there was a forest fire one day deep in the woods, and all the animals were scurrying away as fast as they can to get away from the fire because it was so massive and so consumptive. Well, a cougar was also walking away from the fire. Brave cougar didn't want to run, but he was walking, but he noticed something. He noticed a hummingbird fly above his head, but it was flying in the wrong direction. It was flying toward the fire. And he thought that was odd, but he kept walking. And here comes the hummingbird again, this time going in the same direction as the cougar. And the cougar, again, it was puzzled, and back and forth this hummingbird went, back and forth and back and forth. And it was such bizarre behavior that the cougar finally asked the hummingbird, "Hey, hummingbird, what are you doing? Why are you flying back and forth? You seem to be doing this without any struggle." And the hummingbird said, well, I'm going to the lake and I'm putting water in my beak and I'm taking it back to the fire to extinguish the fire. And the cougar laughed. Come on, you can't put that fire out. And the hummingbird said, yes, I know that. But the forest is my home. It provides shelter for me and my family and food as well. And I pollinate the flowers in the forest, and we are one, the forest and I. I just have to do what I can. I have to do my part. And at that, the spirits of the forest heard the hummingbird, and they were so impressed that they sent a torrent of rain that put the fire out. And the grandmothers of that forest told their grandchildren that if they wanted to see miracles, they just have to do what they can every day. They're not responsible for taking care of all the problems of the world, but if they did their part, if they did what they could, just imagine what a nice place the world would be. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Wonderful. Right.
Thank you, Andy. That's superb. Just exactly what I wanted. A time to love, a time to hate, a time of war, a time of peace. The next story has to do with history. Please welcome Walter Wilson, and he's going to refresh your mind. And he's also going to read a poem about history. Walter?
In 1814, a young attorney from Georgetown traveled to Baltimore under a letter of truce. He wanted to negotiate the release of a friend of his, a Dr. William Bedines, who was a prisoner of war of the British Royal Navy. The young attorney had been to see President Madison, asking for permission to negotiate for the release of his friend. President Madison said yes, giving him letters of transit. He also told him, when you get to Baltimore, look up the U.S. agent for federal prisoner release, John Skinner. John Skinner and the young attorney met with Admiral Cohen, the British admiral in Baltimore Harbor, aboard his flagship. While they were negotiating with the admiral for the release of the good doctor, the two men overheard the British officers and soldiers discussing the upcoming bombardment of Fort McHenry. The British were going to Army was going to invade from land. The British Navy was going to bombard Fort McHenry, destroy the fort. They would sail in, raid the warehouses, set the city on fire, and set sail. Over time, the two men negotiated the release of Dr. Bedine. Admiral Cochrane said, "I'm sorry, but you cannot leave. The three of you will stay here aboard my flagship until the battle is over." Mr. Skinner turned to the admiral and said, "Would you please allow us to go to the other ship that you have sequestered and commandeered in the harbor? I do not wish to stand on a deck of a British ship and watch you attempt to destroy the Fort McHenry." The admiral said yes, although he sent a detachment of Marines with him to make sure no one would escape and alert the citizens of Baltimore or the citizens of Fort McHenry. The admiral had boasted that Fort McHenry would fall in a matter of hours. On 6:30 in the morning on September 16th, the first of 1,800 iron-laden bombshells started to bombard the fort. The battle had begun. It would last for 25 hours. During the battle, the doctor, Mr. Skinner, and the young attorney watched the bombardment. The attorney watched the flag proudly waving defiantly in the air during the bombardment. He watched until nightfall. At nightfall, he listened to the bombardment. In the pre-dawn hours of the next morning, he arose, and the first thing he saw when he set foot on the deck was the American flag still defiantly flying in the air. Later that morning, Friday, September 17th, the battle was over. The British had defeated. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the fort raised its ensign, a massive 30 by 42-foot American flag. Along that were 4 fifers and drummers playing a national song, Yankee Doodle.
Yeah.
Aboard the frigate, Her Majesty's Service, the Hubris, a young midshipman remembered, and I quote, "As the last vessel spread her canvas to the wind, the Americans hoisted a most superb and splendid ensign on their battery. They fired at the same time a gun of defiance. The great ensign, receiving the sun's early light, could be seen for miles. The message was clear. The British threat had passed. Baltimore was saved." At dawn, in an early evening of Friday, September 17th, the USS President docked at Harper's Wharf, Ocean Point, Baltimore. The young attorney took rooms in the Indian Queen Hotel, carrying with him the draft of a poem he had written earlier that day. That night, he finished the last 4 stanzas of his poem. My friends, Francis Scott Key's poem, Fence of Fort McHenry, the template for the Star-Spangled Banner. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at twilight's glass gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous stars over the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets spread glare, bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave? On the shore, dimly seen through the mist of the deep, where foes' hardy host of dead silence reposes. What is it which that breeze over the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half conceals, half discloses? Now it catches the gleam of morning's early light, and fully glory reflected on the shines on the stream. 'Tis the Star-Spangled Banner. Long may it wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. And where is that band so valiantly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country, should leave us no more? Their blood has washed out their foul steps' pollution. No refuge could hide the hireling or slave, for tear of flight or gloom of grave. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Oh, thus ever be when free men shall stand between their loved home and the war's desolation, blessed with victory and peace. May the heaven rescind land praise the power that hath made and hath preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause is just, and this be our motto. In God is our trust, and the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you. Well, wasn't that a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, a time for peace? A time to build up, a time to tear down, a time to dance, and a time to mourn. Please welcome a new teller to our program. This is her first time with us, Suzanne LaCour. Suzanne LaCour. Suzanne.
All right.
Welcome.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So I always tell everybody my name is Suzanne, like shoes on, and if I'm barefoot, you may forget my name, so I'm sorry about that. But I want to tell you a story about my first kiss and my love for food and how they intertwine. So when I was 5 years old, my mom said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, "I'm going to be an artist." My mom said, "Oh, honey, you can't be an artist because artists starve." Now, she was from the Depression and artists actually did starve. So this was her experience. And so she told me this, and I'm like, I'm an artist, like I'm a girl and I'm 5 years old and I know this. So I had a solution. I was going to eat double. I knew that I was never going to starve. And so all comes my life. You know, I sold candy on the bus. I sold beef jerky on the bus. I sold anything I could to make a living because I was going to have money so I could afford to buy food because I am an artist. And when it was coming up on my 13th birthday, and my mom was a terrible cook, and I mean terrible. I mean, her green beans were brown and tasted like bacon grease. It didn't occur to me that you don't leave beans on the stove all week. She never put them in the refrigerator. So by Thursday, they were pretty bad. And let's just say I ate everything at school and other people's lunches. I was ready to go. So on my 13th birthday, the one thing that she could make was flour dipped, salt and peppered, deep fried pork chops. And we were, poor, but I didn't know we were poor. But we only got one piece of meat on Sunday. And that was the only time that we had meat at dinner at home. And my mom bought this big platter of pork chops. And she said, "This is for your 13th birthday party. You invite as many people as you want." And I had a lot of friends at school, but I thought about it. If I don't invite anybody, I get all these pork chops. So comes the day, it was just a couple days later, and my mom takes the platter of pork chops out and she says, "So how many people are coming to your birthday?" And I held my head low. None. And she just was amazed. So she got her Rolodex out, and that was a real thing. I swear it is. It's not just your contacts on your phone. And she got her yellow telephone cord, wrapped it around out of the kitchen, and started dialing people, trying to find somebody to come to my birthday party. Well, she tried several people, but she got one family. Their names were the Crops. And they had an annoying little 3-year-old boy, and his brother, Lauren, which was 12, and I was purely superior. I was 13. And they came over, and because they were guests, even though it was my birthday, they passed the pork chops around, and he got to go first. Well, he took two. And again, I'm like, oh, and even then I'm like, hell no. And so I took two, and then the race was on. And we went around the table maybe 2 or 3 times, and each time grabbing another pork chop and just chewing into with their hands, and grease all dripping down, because still the bacon grease. And it was so liberating until my mom looked at me and just shook her finger like that, nodded disapprovingly. She took the pork chops away. I mean, it was still a pretty big platter. She took them in the kitchen. I'm like, "What?" She said, "You guys go outside and play." And, we were in the middle of 3,000 acres of rice. There wasn't a whole lot to do. So we went to the motorhome and we decided to play house. This purely inferior 12-year-old boy and I were going to play house. And he took a newspaper and pretended to read it. It was upside down. Okay. He wasn't the brightest guy in the world. And I pretended to cook pork chops on the stove. You'd think I had enough, but no, but that's what we were doing. And then out of a movie, he went over and grabbed me and twirled me around, and he stuck his tongue down my throat. I had no idea that this even existed. None, zero. It was like a little jackrabbit, wet jackrabbit going in and out of my mouth. It was disgusting. I was, almost like just horrified. And then he said, no, this is how adults kiss. I'm surprised you don't know that. You're 13. Well, I did grow up in a small town, but no one ever told me about that. And so I didn't want to act like I didn't know. He told me his parents did it in front of him all the time. This is the way that adults kiss. So I thought, okay, what the heck? I'll try it one more time. And he did it again, and it wasn't very pleasant, but then it kind of tasted like a pork chop. Thank you very much.
Yes, that was great. How many of you had thoughts about being 13 or 12? Hey. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to reap. Please welcome our first poet, Jennifer Pickering. Jennifer?
All right.
Yeah, I'll do.
Thank you so much for inviting me to read to the Storytellers. This first poem is called Sock Relations. In my bio, I mention getting published with the late great playwright and poet Nodashaki Shangi and Sharon Olds. Of course, they both became really famous. But the poem I'm going to read was published in Heresies in New York City. It's called Sock Relations. And it's kind of it's in the voice of my grandfather's dialect. Your grandpa wore white cottons, summers, gray woolens, winters. Your grandma balled his socks. Darned holes, Thompson toes. Try to get this up. Yes, I can.
You want it out?
Yeah, it's gonna. Darned holes. Oh, maybe I'll start. I'll start over. That's okay.
Nope.
Okay, so sock relations. Your grandpa wore white cotton socks summers, gray woolens winters. Your grandma balled his socks. Darned holes Thompson toes poked through. They stayed mated. Your mom married a man wore white cottons, gray woolens. The marriage endured. You married a man wore Orlon, knotted his socks and kept a spare drawer of lost mates. The marriage was a mismatch. Now your new man's got himself a jar and an egg and doesn't ask you to mend what his living wears out. Thank you. So that was the poem I memorized. This is a new poem. It's called Bruised Skies, and it's published in Thule Review 2023 Thule Review. It's an anthology that the Sacramento Poetry Center produces each year. So there'll be another one. Bruised Skies. She thinks of their colliding, of forgetting into soft tangles, blood sealed beneath cellophane of skin, hearts that thrum as one, charmed bracelets ring her wrists, music follows the hedge of the orange azaleas. Tears cloud her eyes, perfect as pearls. It is a time for bruised skies, of waiting. Unexpected rain falls, heavy, unforgiving. Bones stir, surface where they do not belong. Dogs' ears twitch long before arrivals. Burgundy unleashes fruity breaths. Candles taste with flamed tongues. The sweetbread refuses to rise, sinks back into itself. Fists unfold, repair the undoing.
Yeah.
And this poem is it's a recent poem, and kind of what I've done is use trees as a metaphor for different stages in my life, different times in my life. Of course, it's not totally all true, of course. It's not total autobiographic. I dream of trees. The weeping willow rains tears on dragons in the alfalfa fields. Multiplies leafy switches to keep them at bay. Granny's choice to make us mind if words are not enough. None of this tames our wild, not the dragon in the field, nor the dragon in the field, whose summer fire steals our breaths. 2. The peaches blush lipstick blooms, July shape velvet fruit, freestones filling bins before summer heat. I am here to bloom too. Leave the girl behind, graft as one, grow strong alone. Heady in my own perfume, the trees keep my secrets. 3. The black walnut, a friend I've known 30 years. She here 120 more before. Verdant shade, squirrel's treehouse. Okra leaves declare fall. Walnuts, winters her limbs, fruit galls. The flicker's favorite. Goat's blood on her roots. Easter sacrifice. Seasons forgave. Memory a stubborn stain. This poem records. 4. The flowering maples ring scarlet bells. Call to worship in this garden. A budding moon showers silver light. Callous flaming wicks mark the path. To pews, benches once new, weathered as their seekers. Statuettes of Goddess Venus, Mother Mary, prone on beds of camphor leaves, unbroken by the errant limbs. Righted, they send blessings. Thank you. One more short one, bit of wisdom, I think. Maybe not, maybe some of them, but it's short. Children are like rivers. When you try to straighten them out, they might go along with you for a while. Then they'll jump their banks, snatch back their wild. All you really need to do is widen their boundaries, and let them meander.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Very nice.
Thank you, Jennifer. And that brings a lot of, there's a time for everything. There was a time when a willow tree was very important to me. It taught me, don't leave home farther than you can get back. You see, I got mad at my aunt, and I ran away from home, taking 3 dogs and 2 goats with me. I was going to the neighbor that lived 3 miles down the river. But I was about 3 or 4, maybe 3. And it was a long ways. So I finally turned around. But Jack, the ditch guy who kept the ditches clean, saw me too far from home. And so he stopped by at my aunt's house and told her where I was. And I don't think I've ever forgiven willow trees, because when my aunt met with me and I was tired and I wanted her to carry me home, she had a little pocket knife and she went over to a willow tree. She cut a little switch, and every time I stopped, she gave me a swap on the back of my legs, and she would say, "That will teach you to go farther away from home, then you can come back." And that was, and I've never forgotten that. Don't go farther than you can get back. And I always take directions. If I'm going someplace that I don't know, I always take directions on how to get home. I wonder if that willow tree has anything to do with it. A time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, and a time to weep. Please welcome. Oh, I forgot to tell you, the story that Ed talks about is not going to appear today. He has a different story, and it's all because of a red bandana. I'll let him explain while he changed stories. Welcome, Ed Lewis.
I had a story that I developed in the early 90s that I learned from this amazing storyteller who you all should go online and see. His name is David Novak. And he's the master of using props. And so I was going to revive this story. I worked with him, and it was his story, but he helped me craft it into a new version. However, I couldn't find the prop that's essential to the story. I did find it yesterday, but it was too late to really put this all together. So I'm going to do a different story. Some of you may know about the bridge to nowhere that goes from Ketchikan, Alaska, to the small island of Gravina with a population of 50. It was proposed by Alaskan Senator Ted Stevens in 2002, and it was backed by then presidential candidate Sarah Palin. It very soon got out publicity that this was a prime example of our government's pork barrel spending. It was quite the scandal, and it got defunded in 2006. So my story relates a little bit to this, to Gravina Island, because my mother was born there in 1919. Her family had emigrated from Denmark through Canada and eventually got down to this small island that had 100 people on it. And my grandfather was a consummate mechanic and boat builder. And the 100 people that lived there were all fishermen with their families, and they fished the rich salmon waters in the Pacific. It was a great place, my mom said, to grow up. She had 3 brothers, 3 sisters. And when they weren't fishing, they would get together around a campfire and they would swap stories. And there were some really good tales that were told. And one of them was this story in my version that my mother had related to me. In 1926, there were a family of bears that lived in a lavish castle on Gravina Island. Now, every morning they would wake up and their French chef would prepare the most exquisite organic kale porridge. And these three bears would go down and sit around the table. And the papa bear, in this one day, took a bite of this organic kale porridge. He spit it on the ground. He said, "This porridge is too hot. I mean, it's hotter than my favorite cayenne pepper sandwiches." What was it? It was too hot. Well, Mama Bear, she took a bite of her porridge and she spit that out too. And she said, "Man, this is colder than the glacier ice I use in my pina coladas that I drink every night." It was what? Too cold. Well, Baby Bear took his porridge. It was, what was it? Just right. And he scarfed that all down. Well, of course, immediately, Papa Bear fired that French chef and got everyone together and said, "Okay, this is traumatic for Mom and I, and it's time we go out for our normal walk into the forest to our happy space where we can meditate and deal with this trauma that we've just experienced." So they headed out. But what they didn't know was that in their golden chariot out in front, Lox Goldie was sitting. She was sitting there because she had just escaped from the maximum security prison on the north end of the island. And she was a consummate, exquisite thief. Now, before they left, Mama Bear said, "Hey, did you hear the news? This Lox Goldie has escaped from this prison, and she'll probably come to our castle and want to steal things. No big deal. I put 3 bolts, deadbolts on the door. She's not going to get in." So they were out at their happy place, and Lox Goldie just walked up, karate chopped that door, kicked it in right off the hinges, and sat down at that table. She was pretty hungry after walking all evening through the forest and evading all the people looking for her. And so she took a bite of that organic kale porridge that the Papa Bear had. She spit that on the floor because it was still too hot. Well, she took Mama Bear's porridge, took a sip of that, spit it on the floor, and it was too cold. She looked at Baby Bear's porridge and it was all gone. What's she going to do now? One thing I know about her, and you probably realize this too, is that she's very clever. And so she took Papa Bear's hot, spicy porridge and Mama Bear's sweet pina colada kale, organic kale, and mixed them together. And then it was just right. And she scarfed that on down. Well, then she had to go about her thieving ways. So she took her big bag and she took all the kale and oats and silverware and she piled it in that bag and she took it out to the U-Haul trailer she had stolen from north up in the island, loaded that up, and then she took some chairs and a few other things, so paintings like Monet and Picasso, and loaded those into the U-Haul. And then, she was tired. So she went upstairs to take a little nap and she lay down in Papa Bear's bed, but it was too hard. Mama Bear's bed was too soft. She just sunk right down. She wasn't going to be able to get up. And she went to Baby Bear's bed and she laid there and it was just right. Well, after the meditation, the family was all mellow again and ready to come back and relax. And they came into the yard where their castle was, and they saw the doors. The door was off the hinges, and they heard from the windows upstairs, and they knew exactly who was there. So they got in that chariot and they hightailed it off of Gravina Island. They made it all the way down here to Sacramento, and right outside by Joyce's house, the farm she's at, they started an organic kale farm operation. And, they become quite rich from doing that. Lox Goldie, she kept up with the thieving ways, and she was always one step ahead of the sheriff. However, I know, I can tell by looking at some of you here that you probably live in a castle. And if you do, you better beware, because Lox Goldie just might be coming your way. And if you really like this story, you'd like to develop your own story about this, just send royalty checks to me, Ed Lewis, at 2021 Gravina Island, Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. I think I'll go try that. Never tried that before. I've tried a lot of things, but not that. Okay, we are now at a point where we can have a full break. There are goodies and there's conversation for all. Okay?
How long is break?
15, maybe a little bit more than 15 minutes. The bathrooms are through the door. Oh, and we have a donation basket. You don't need to donate, but that is for the Sacramento Valley Storytelling Festival coming next March, and we have to raise a lot of money in order to put it on. Thank you.
There you go.
A time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones. Our next storyteller has a story about how I found my estranged son after 11 years. Please welcome Chris Hennessy. Chris?
All right. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I found my estranged son after 11 years. He did not have an internet presence, so he was not easy to find. But when I found the address a couple weeks later, I drove down to the Bay Area and I found his apartment building and I entered, and the next thing I knew, I was standing at the door of my son. I knocked lightly. I heard a TV on in the background, and I knocked lightly again, and the sound of the TV went off. I walked around to the back of his apartment. All the shades were closed, even on the porch. There wasn't any sign of life, but I had a feeling that he was there, and I came back around again, and I knocked a few more times, no answer. Shane, it's Dad. I just want to see you. I just want to talk to you for a couple of minutes. Could you please come out? I knocked again and nothing. So I walked out dejectedly to my car. I had parked in a shaded spot. It was a hot day. It was the only shaded spot in the lot. It was 90 degrees. Pardon my allergies. And I had sat in my car, turned the air conditioning on. I felt comfortable. And I called up a buddy of mine who's been like a mentor to me for many years. And I was very down. And why would my son, after all these years, not want to talk to me? The communication with my buddy was working, and all of a sudden in my rearview mirror, I saw one and then two big, huge, young, handsome Bay Area cops. My son had called the cops. I get out of the car and I was talking to the one officer. The other officer started walking away into the lot, and this tall, handsome young man was walking this way. And I don't see as well as I used to, but I looked carefully and I saw that wavy hair with blonde streaks and that handsome face. It was my son. It was my first time getting a glimpse of my little buddy boy in 11 years. I remember the time he came home from school and he was telling me about a bridge they learned at in school.
And it was the Golden Gates Bridge. And to this day, when I'm in conversation with somebody and I have to say the name of that bridge, I say, yeah, you have to go over the Golden Gates Bridge. I don't think anybody ever catches it. The next day we were on a walk and he looked up in the mountains and he said, he was 5 years old. He said, see those mountains? That's America. So my memories I have of my son growing up, I coached all of his teams in baseball and basketball and cross country. The officer and him finished their conversation. And in the meantime, I talked to the other officer. And there Shane went walking away out of my life again after 11 years. I had done some research and I knew that estranged adult children don't call up their parents and say, hey, mom and dad, next Tuesday at 3 o'clock, I'm cutting you off. And I don't know, I won't be speaking to you for 10 or 20 years. They just stop communicating, leaving you in the complete dark. It's very difficult. The officer came over to me and he said, he doesn't want you here. Next time you're here, it'll be trespassing.
Wow.
In my mind, I said to the cop, but I explained to him like I explained to the other officer, and the other officer was a big, tall, handsome, Asian NFL looking dude. My father, who was a New York City cop, would have loved this guy because when I talked, he looked at me and he paid attention. The other officer, I said, sir, I mean no harm. I just want to see my son. It's been 11 years since I've seen him and I found him. Unfortunately, officer, the prostate cancer I've been battling for 15 years recently went into my lungs. And I'm fearful that unless my son comes back to me soon, I'll never see him again. And the officers, I understand, but he doesn't want you here. It's going to be trespassing. So I'm going to have to ask you to leave now. Got in my car. The two officers were there. And as I pulled out of the spot, I looked over. The one officer that was the mean one was writing in his book. The other officer who listened to me was standing like this as I drove off. And I thought to myself, it appears that he's at the funeral procession of one of his fellow officers. And then I thought, you know what? This guy gets it. He understands my predicament. And it really gave me a little bit of comfort. I drove out of the parking lot teary-eyed, and about a mile up, I stopped and I called the two people I trust the most. My friend Jordan, who said, Chris, I've known you for 25 years. I've seen you with your kids. You were the best dad. You gave them a lot of time. You taught me to be a better dad. Live your life, dude. Keep on going. Keep putting one foot in front of the other. Hung up with Jordan. I called up my wife. And when I explained to my wife, as my son walked away, I had said, Shane, I just wanted to speak to you. I wanted to see you. I'm here for you anytime. Please call or reach out to me. I'm always here for you. And Shane walked away. When I told my wife what I had said to Shane, she said, Chris, he heard your message. That'll be in his head for a really long time. You did the right thing. You were a great dad. You were a great husband. I love you. We hung up the phone. I was still very dejected and very sad, but very comfortable in my car and very relaxed, which is a weird combination. I wanted to do something different. I really needed to take a dip in the ocean. And I drove 45 minutes with music blaring in my head the whole time. And I get out of the car at Pacifica, which is just south of San Francisco. I walked through the sacred sands of the beach. And in front of me was a mighty Pacific Ocean. Put my chair down, I put my towel down, and I walked right into the water, which was freaking cold. But I didn't care because I needed to get in. I needed that medicinal feeling from the water, from the ocean. And I just kept walking, and as a wave was just about to hit me, I dove underneath, and boy, did that wake me up. And I stayed in the ocean, in and out for about 15 minutes. I walked out, and as I walked out, I thought, man, that was more rejuvenating than the best cup of coffee ever. I sat down in my chair. I looked out towards Hawaii. Couldn't quite make it out. Noticed the kids playing in the beach, the surfers surfing. I closed my eyes, and the sun on my face felt really good. I really needed to be outside. And I just daydreamed for a while. And when I was ready, about 20 minutes later, I stood up, walked to my car, washed my feet off, got in the car, had a change of clothes, and carefully maneuvered different clothes on, dry clothes, drove through Daly City, through Sacramento on 80, over the beautiful Bay Bridge, 68 degrees, pure sunshine. My windows were down, the music was on. I had looked at my map. My hour and 15-minute drive home was going to be about 2.5 hours. It was Saturday night traffic. Normally I would care, but I didn't care. I had nothing to do. I was going to just chill, relax in the car, and just let my mind think and wander wherever it wanted to go. And then I thought to myself, you know what? I've got the greatest wife in the world. I have the best wife in the world. I've got the two best daughters in the world. I'm doing what I love to do. I'm filmmaking and speaking and writing a book and writing a newsletter and all of this enriching stuff. I have two sons that have been estranged for 11 years, Shane and Chris. It's a really hard thing. But I thought to myself, I will never, ever give up hope that these two beautiful boys will reach out and try to reconnect with their best dad on earth. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Chris.
Wow. Bravo, man. Wow.
Thank you, Chris. Wonderful story. A time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. Please welcome your food provider and our best greeter in the world, Vicki Carroll.
Yeah.
As a poet, not as a storyteller. She was a poet first. Vicki.
Thank you. You want to use the stand? I think I do. Or I can just do this.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, guys, I haven't been up here doing anything at this venue in a long time, so let me show you what I've been doing lately. Can you see it?
White House. The White House.
Oh, yeah.
Move it down to the signature on the light, on the bottom.
Oh, I think I know what signature it is. Yeah, well, some days, some years you just want to try a little different stuff, right? So anyways, I wrote them.
Tell us
And-
who it's from.
It's from President Biden, of course. I sent him a poem because I felt so bad how his press is always so sucky. So I sent him a poem I made up. And I waited about 3 weeks. And he wrote back to me, and I want to just share this with you. Is that all right?
Yes, sure.
Dear Miss Carroll, I love poetry. Thank you for sharing yours with me. One of my favorite contemporary poets, Seamus Heaney, wrote this in his 1991 work, The Cure at Troy. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime. The longed for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. Though we as a nation have lived through some of our most difficult days, I truly believe in the bright future ahead. Together, let's make hope and history rhyme. Sincerely, Joe Biden.
Wow.
Now, here is the poem I wrote too. You do not have to be a scholar to send him a poem. I just want you guys to know. Okay? I'm for Joe. I want to ride in President Biden's Corvette. I want to be his friend. I want Joe to know I think he's great. I want to ride in Joe's Corvette. I want to thank him for his service. I want to give him a hug. He has worked his life to support the working class. I want to ride along with Joe on his journey. I trust him to reach across the aisle. I don't trust Congress at this time to bring up country's business in a timely manner. Go Joe, yay Joe, let's help our world, help each other prosper, work together, accomplish big things. Let's bring justice to all. There are many that trust you will find support, give a hand, sign a bill. You got it, Joe. You know what to do. I want to ride in your Corvette, Joe. Respectfully, Vicky Carroll. And then he goes back. Here's a picture of, can you see it? Here's Joe's Corvette, and I just put a little fake thing of me on there. Can you guys see that? Pretty funny.
Yeah.
If you hold it still.
So anyway, that's what I've been doing lately. Okay, my next thing I wanted to say is, D.R. Wagner was quite a poet. Many people loved him. Many people did not. But I did, and tomorrow is his memorial in Locke. It's from 1 to 4. Dan and I are doing the barbecue. It's a potluck. And there's going to be bands and stuff. So anybody who wants to come down there and say goodbye to DR, come on down.
What time?
1 to 4. Now, every time a poet leaves, that's in this one poem I wrote, If Poets Were Rock Stars, I read the poem again. So some people have heard this several times because as we get older, certain people die. They just happen to be. Anyway, it's called If Poets Were Rock Stars. James Lee Joe would be Tom Petty with a touch of Jerry Garcia. He takes everyday activities, elevates them in verse, transcends ordinary reality, a blessing, a prayer, a song. D.R. Wagner is David Bowie. He takes his reader far, far away to stars and space, magnificent timing, style, and grace. Gentle landing, feeling lighter too. Major Tom bids adieu. Carol Lynn, mistress of femininity and poetry. Which rock star is she? Stevie Nicks is who I see. Carol Lynn's poems tell stories of life, heart with loving intimacy of child, mother, and wife. Angela James. I see Angela as Tina Turner. She rocks and rolls with stories and poems. She is not shy. She tells it as it is, as she's rolling down the river. Angela uses a full range of emotions, captures her audience, draws them into her notions. Now, as for me, I want to be Janis Joplin, minus the drug shooting and pill popping. Freewheeling, fun loving, one of the guys, kind of poet, die hard. Nothing to lose, might as well. Not so far from heaven or hell. Do you guys hear Janice laughing? I think I'm still good.
No, you're fine. We're doing fine.
Well, I just turned in a bunch of poems for Dave's New Visions, so some of these are in there. Well, some of these are in there. Yeah. This one's called Nothing's Perfect. If it is, it's a Disney production. Please remember, I am not perfect. And in imperfection, there is beauty called creativity. I love to think we can create a beautiful life inside a world falling apart. Let's choose creativity. We both can have our lovely world in this time we call now. My hands are shaking. Okay, no. Okay, no. Oh, okay, my last one. And some people might get upset, but remember, it's all in good fun. Try to remember. And many of you have heard it before, but I figure I might as well get equal time, right? Ode to Mr. T, as in playing golf. Who are you, little man, born with a platinum spoon in your hand? You can choose what you want. Have you given any thought to what power you have brought? To how you used your power given to block what the people sought? Shame on you. Save your skin as cowards do. This fight has to begin. The people think you sin. You lied and threw our Constitution under a bus. You schemed with other country, turned our rights into dust. Oops. You even believe you're a king. Anything you do is tidy white clean. You're a mean one, Mr. T. You're a criminal, Mr. T. You probably won't go to heaven. Mr. T, you will go to 11. Worse, that is. No quid pro quo. And thank you for this political announcement.
Thank you, Vicky. Well. I lost my place. A time to cast away, a time to gather. A time to gather stones together. I'd like to welcome another new poet, new storyteller to us. Not a new storyteller, just new to us. A first time. And I'm probably going to murder her name. I am probably the worst person about doing this. Please welcome Zaya Apte. Close, okay?
Right. Yeah, I think it's right. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it is close. It's Zai, but yeah, that's quite close actually. Thank you. All right. So today I'm going to tell you a story about me and my father, especially because my father is coming to the US from India, and we are going to spend some time and quite a lot of time under the same roof. And that's a quite scary kind of a prospect because I have been living around the world and I have not been living with him for a long time. Anyway, so I was about 9 years when I woke up one morning with a terrible stomach pain and it was crushing. And my father suspected that maybe I have eaten something outside and it's food poisoning. And he kept asking me, "You ate something without my knowledge, isn't it?" And I would say, no. But eventually, basically, I started vomiting and he realized that this is something far worse than food poisoning. So he took me to the hospital nearby, and the doctor said that, well, it looks like she has appendicitis, and that tiny little piece of my gut is basically is incensed, is angry, is enraged, and trying to just implode the entire gut system. So he said that she has to be operated immediately. And so they operated me, and I was 9 years. So my parents were extremely worried, and I was given general anesthesia. And I came out of that anesthesia, I think, after a couple of hours. And then at night, me and my father were in that hospital room. And because of the surgery and everything else, in the middle of the night, I simply couldn't sleep. And so I kept pestering my father and saying that, I can't sleep, tell me a story. And my father was exhausted because he had been running around for medicine and, gathering money for my surgery and all of that. So he said, why don't you tell me a story? And so I said, okay. And that was the day basically when I was supposed to perform in a play. And of course, I was not in a play, but I was in a different theater. That was Operation Theater instead. So I said that, okay, I will recite you all the dialogues that I was supposed to say, and also the dialogues of my friends. And I started reciting them, and it was middle of the night. It was pitch dark. There was no light around. And I was, reciting the dialogues. And in the middle of it, I just fell silent and I fell asleep. And then I realized that I was in his arms, and he was basically running around in the hospital. So for a second, I thought maybe I'm still in the play and this is some different character that I did not know of, and I'm still playing some role. But then I tried to understand what was happening, that it was not just my father, but there were also other people who were running around. And then I realized basically that the whole building was shaking violently and they were trying to escape. And since I had been operated like a couple of hours ago, I couldn't walk. So he had to literally take me, and it was basically earthquake was happening. And so he started to run towards the staircase. We were about, I think, on third or fourth floor. And the nurse, the guard nurse, as she was called, I do not know why, but she thought that it's a good idea to lock the entire floor. And there was this huge gate, the iron gate, and she had locked it. So everyone went there, my father went there, and they started shouting, and the nurse was trying to find the key, but the earthquake was basically happening, and everyone was shouting at her. So she lost the thought, which she couldn't remember where she kept the keys. And so finally she wanted to have some control, and she just shouted back at everyone and said that, what, this earthquake is not that bad. Just go back to sleep. I'm not opening anything. And so finally everyone had to return. But by then earthquake did kind of calm down. And so basically the night passed, and, I survived. However, the region nearby was hit really badly, and thousands of people died that night. And I imagine that there must be quite many fathers who were carrying their daughters or sons, and they simply couldn't make it, and they were under the rubbles. I look back at the story, and the other day I was writing in my diary that my father is going to come, and it's going to be difficult for me to actually deal with it, because, the relationship is not always that rosy and beautiful. He tends to criticize me a lot, and, and of course, I also have my role to play in it. But there are two things that I basically wrote in the diary, thinking of this night. And I said to myself, number one is that maybe, when parents look at us, and when they're being very critical and constantly interfering in our life, maybe it's basically because they see us as this kid who has been recently been operated upon and who is not able to walk on their own. And maybe they see our life as being in an earthquake. And that's why they're just trying to, kind of pick us up and carry us, in a maybe not always in a helpful way, but that's what he's doing when he's criticizing me. And the second thing is, I don't have kids of my own, but I imagine having kids is basically like literally placing them in your own gut. So when things are happening, going well, when relationships are fine, the kids might act like microbacteria that helps you to digest your food and is good. But when things don't go well at all, maybe those kids can become a virus that induce diarrhea in your stomach, right? So it's through pain and pleasure. That's the kind of relationship you have. But ultimately, I also think that, being part of somebody's guts is quite a privileged thing. So I would rather not get flushed out of their system. So I think this appendicitis, this small part that I lost that day, I do not know what happens to the organs that are removed from our system, where they do end up going. I don't know where that gut is in this universe. But I think of it and I say, thank you so much for giving me this perspective about a father and daughter's relationship. That's my story.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very nice. Okay. For everything, there is a reason and a season. There's a time for love. There's a time for hate. There's a time for peace. I swear it's not too late. And that's the end of our program. Next month, Vicki Carroll will be the host, and her theme is summertime, according to my records, vacation, according to hers. And I'm speaking for her, but it will be on the web. I'm not on the website, on the email. We'll send an email out, and anyone who would like to volunteer to join us is welcome. We usually have six storytellers and 2 poets, which is what we had today. And I'm very glad you're here. And are there any other announcements? Oh, I have one. I don't have very many response to the Hill and Valley picnic on June 22nd. So if you're coming, please let me know. Everybody's welcome. Families, there's swimming for kids, except that you have to supervise your own kids. My lifeguards are in college now and they're not available. They have been my lifeguards for years. How dare them? But everyone's welcome. We laugh, we eat food, we tell stories. Oh, yes, we always have the story challenge. I started out and I have a hat and I pass my hat to somebody else and they have to tell a story unless they have an excellent excuse. They have an excellent excuse. We sometimes let them off and they can pass the hat to someone else. But you have to have a really good excuse.
When is the Hill and Valley?
It's June 22nd from 4 to 7:30. You don't have to leave at 7:30. Sometimes we have a bonfire, but it doesn't get dark until later. So, you know, oh yes, it's at my house and there's plenty of parking because the barnyard is dry and the weeds are even mowed, which hasn't been before. So
Can I say one thing? There's an
Yes.
announcement. Sierra Nevada Storytelling.
I don't have it with me.
So I just want to make mention of the Sierra Storytelling Festival. They actually provide donation for us every time we do our festival every year. And it is in a town of North Columbia. It's up behind Nevada City. It's June, I think 28th and 29th this year. It's the oldest storytelling festival in California. And I think the oldest storytelling festival, or the second oldest storytelling festival in the whole country. They have outstanding storytellers there. It's an internationally known storytelling festival. And if you just go to your computer and Google Sierra Storytelling Festival, you'll find out all you need to know to get tickets and go to that. I hope you can go. So. Okay. Okay, Joyce, you want to close out?
Okay, please join us next month, third Saturday. I forget dates sometimes, but just remember this, everything's on the third Saturday, even our festival. So we are set. If you look at the calendar and you say, oh, it's the third Saturday, I need to be someplace, and this is where you need to be.
Yeah.
And in June, it's the 15th.
And what?
In June, it's the 15th.
In June, it's the 15th.
Because-
Thank you.
Yeah, because if you're.
Yeah, you
one
I have a little story. I rely on my computer to tell me what I'm doing. I look it up on Monday and I forget. We have a little thing we call the